Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to guide you into a night of eerie tales and deep sleep. I know you use this video to unwind, so before you drift off, tap that like button and subscribe for more chilling stories. Also, drop a comment, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the stories take over. They say the Whispering Vale chooses its visitors. Not the other way around. Some say it is a blessing. Others, a curse. But no one leaves unchanged. And so, on the night the stars faded into the quiet hush of the sky, when the wind carried the scent of rain and earth, Leora found herself drawn toward the edge of the world she knew. The forest before her was unlike any other. Tall, ancient trees stood in solemn silence, their branches heavy with secrets too old to remember. The leaves swayed gently in the unseen breeze, whispering in a language just beyond understanding. The ground beneath her feet was soft, as though the earth itself had been waiting to welcome her. The path ahead was narrow, winding through the trees, disappearing into the velvet shadows beyond. It should have been unsettling, walking alone into a place untouched by time, but instead, it felt right. The air was thick with something unseen, something ancient. And in the stillness, she felt it. A presence. Not watching. Not waiting. Calling. The whisper in her mind was soft, like the rust. Leora stood still, her breath shallow, her heartbeat a quiet rhythm in the heavy silence. The air was thick with waiting. Not a menacing presence. Not a threat. Just something there. The fragments of the broken stone glowed faintly under her fingertips, pulsing in time with something unseen, something old. It was not just broken, it had been shattered. Not by time. Not by accident. But by intent. She traced the jagged edges of one fragment, and the whisper returned, softer this time, curling into her mind like mist. You were always meant to return. The words were neither question nor statement, but something in between. A truth half-formed, waiting for her to understand it. A breeze stirred the clearing, gentle and cool, carrying the scent of rain-kissed leaves, damp moss, and something sweeter, something like memory. It curled around her skin, threading through her hair, and for the briefest moment, she thought she felt. Fingertips. Light. Barely there. Like a presence brushing past her in the dark. She turned, slowly, carefully, her gaze searching the trees at the clearing's edge. The shadows were deep there, woven thick between the trunks, shifting ever so slightly, as though they were not mere absence of light, but something more. Something moving. Watching. Waiting. And then. A shape. Or perhaps, the suggestion of one. Not solid, not yet whole. A figure standing just beyond the veil of trees, its edges blurred, its presence felt rather than seen. Leora's pulse quickened. It did not step forward. It did not speak. It simply existed. And in that moment, she understood. The ground beneath Leora's feet was no longer solid earth, no longer soft moss or damp leaves. It was something else entirely, something weightless and shifting, as if she were walking upon the threads of a dream. Her breath came slow, steady, as she let herself be carried forward, deeper into the heart of something vast and unknowable. The air around her thickened, heavy with a presence she could not yet see. The whispering voices curled like mist through the trees, wrapping around her limbs, pulling at the edges of her thoughts. Return, restore, remember. The words were no longer just sound, they were felt, brushing against her skin like fingertips, winding through her hair like the hush of a long-forgotten lullaby. Somewhere ahead, beyond the shifting haze, a light flickered. Soft. Elusive. Like the glow of fireflies in the depths of summer. She stepped toward it, her movements slow and deliberate, her pulse a quiet drumbeat against the stillness. The mist parted, revealing a glade unlike any she had ever seen. It was not empty. Figures stood in the clearing, their forms blurred at the edges, their presence like shadows cast by a light that no longer burned. They did not speak. They did not move. But they were watching. Leora swallowed, the weight of their silent gaze pressing against her ribs. She clutched the shard tighter in her palm, the edges biting into her skin, anchoring her to the moment. "Who are you?" Her voice was barely more than a breath, swallowed almost instantly by the hush of the veil. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a step. One of the figures moved, slow and fluid, gliding toward her as if carried by an unseen current. As it drew closer, its form became clearer. A woman. Or at least, something that had once been a woman. Her face was veiled in shadow, her eyes pools of quiet sorrow, reflecting something vast and endless. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above Leora's cheek, though they did not touch. "You have come at last." The words were a sigh, barely more than the rustling of leaves in the wind. Leora's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" she asked again, though a part of her already knew. A memory stirred in her blood. A name whispered on the edges of her mind. Not a stranger. Not entirely. The woman's gaze did not waver. "You were always meant to return." Leora's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it. To turn away. But she couldn't. The shards of the broken stone hummed in her palm, pulsing in time with the rhythm of something unseen. The truth was waiting. It had always been waiting. She took a breath, deep and slow, letting the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Then, with careful, deliberate steps, she moved deeper into the glade. The figures did not stop her. They only watched. And as she crossed the threshold, something in the air shifted. The past stirring, unraveling. And the veil whispering its secrets at last. The air within the glade was different, thicker, charged with something unseen. It clung to Leora's skin like cool silk, humming just beneath the surface, threading through the quiet rise and fall of her breath. The figures remained where they stood, their silent presence neither welcoming nor threatening. They were watchers, sentinels of something ancient, something waiting. The woman before her, the one who had spoken, still hovered just beyond reach. Though her form flickered like candlelight, the sorrow in her eyes remained steady, deep as the roots of the veil. Leora felt the weight of her words settle within her chest. "You were always meant to return." The phrase did not feel like an accusation, nor a command. It was simply truth, one that had existed long before she had stepped into this place. She swallowed. Return, to what? A pause. A shift in the air, as though the veil itself were listening. The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, something else answered. A low, resonant hum rose from the glade, not from a voice, but from the very ground beneath her feet. It rippled outward, trembling through the trees, through the shadows, through the hush of unseen things that had long remained silent. Leora's grip on the shard tightened. The humming grew stronger, vibrating through her ribs, matching the pulse of the fragments in her palm. The sensation was neither painful nor frightening. It was familiar. It was calling. And deep in her marrow, she knew, she had felt this before. Not in this life. Not with this name. But somewhere, in the threads of something older than memory. A vision bloomed at the edges of her mind, hazy and distant, like glimpsing the reflection of stars on dark water. A temple, half forgotten. A circle of figures cloaked in silver, their hands raised toward a stone that pulsed like moonlight. A voice, her own, yet not, whispering words that sent ripples through the air, through the fabric of the veil itself. And then, shattering. A great and terrible rupture, like the sky itself being torn open. Darkness spilling in. A scream, swallowed by the void. Leora gasped as the vision shattered, stumbling back a step. The weight of it left her breathless, the echoes still clinging to her mind like the remnants of a dream. She looked at the woman before her, her voice unsteady. "What did I do?" The woman's gaze softened. "What you believed was right." A soft wind stirred through the glade, carrying the faintest whisper of something like regret. "But right and safe," the woman continued, "are not always the same." Leora's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The veil had not simply chosen her. It had remembered her. And somewhere, in the depths of its silence, it had been waiting for her to remember, too. She exhaled, long and slow, grounding herself in the cool air, the steady hush of the trees. The watchers did not move. They did not demand. They only waited. And deep within the quiet of the veil, the truth continued to unfurl, soft and patient, like the tide creeping toward shore. Leora took another step forward. She was ready to listen. She was ready to remember. Leora stepped forward, her breath slow, her pulse a quiet drumbeat beneath her ribs. The air around her was thick with memory, though not all of it was hers. It pressed against her skin, whispered through her bones, wrapped around her like unseen hands guiding her deeper into the glade. The woman before her, her shadowy form flickering like a candle in the wind, watched in silence, as though waiting for something only Leora could give. The shard in Leora's palm pulsed again. A heartbeat. A tether. She turned it over between her fingers, feeling the smooth edges, the faint hum that vibrated through her fingertips. It was a piece of something larger, something lost. Something broken. Leora swallowed. This was part of it, wasn't it? Part of the stone. The woman's gaze did not waver. Yes. Leora tightened her grip. And I was the one who shattered it. A pause. The glade held its breath. Then, at last, the woman nodded. A shiver rippled through Leora's spine. She had known. Deep down, she had known. But hearing it aloud, feeling the weight of it settle into the hush, made it real. She felt the eyes of the silent figures upon her. Not accusing. Not condemning. Just, waiting. But waiting for what? Leora exhaled, slow and measured, grounding herself in the rhythm of the veil. Then tell me, why? The woman tilted her head, her form flickering like mist in the moonlight. You already know. Leora opened her mouth to argue, but the moment she did, something shifted. The glade trembled. Not in fear. Not in warning. But in awakening. A low sound rumbled beneath her feet, like distant thunder rolling through the roots of the earth. The trees shuddered, their leaves stirring with a whisper of something old, something patient. And then, the visions came. Not in fragments this time. Not in glimpses. But in full, unbroken memory. Leora's breath caught as the world around her faded, the present slipping away, dissolving into something deeper. She was no longer standing in the glade. She was somewhere else. Someone else. A temple stood before her, half carved from the cliffs that overlooked the vale. Its walls shimmered with runes etched in silver, its pillars wrapped in vines that pulsed with soft, golden light. The air here was thick with power, humming beneath her skin, pressing into her lungs with every breath. And at the temple's center, the stone. Whole. Radiant. Alive. It pulsed with a steady, gentle light, its glow casting long shadows against the temple walls. Around it stood a circle of figures. Not silent watchers. Not flickering ghosts. But people. Whole. Breathing. Real. And among them, Leora. Or rather, the woman she had been before. She stood at the head of the circle, her robes lined with silver thread, her hair bound with a band of woven moonlight. Her hands were raised. Her lips moved in quiet incantation. And her eyes. Her eyes were filled with sorrow. Leora, the past Leora, turned to the others, her voice breaking through the hush. The barrier is weakening. A ripple of unease spread through the gathered figures. One of them, a man with eyes like dark glass, lined with years of wisdom, stepped forward. We knew this day would come. Leora nodded. But not so soon. She turned her gaze to the stone, her fingers curling into fists. It is no longer enough. The words hung heavy in the air. Another figure, this one younger, her face set in quiet determination, spoke next. Then we must strengthen it. Leora's lips pressed together. No. A murmur spread through the circle. She lifted her gaze, her voice steady. It is not enough to strengthen it. It must be remade. The murmurs turned to silence. And in that silence, a choice was made. Leora reached out, her hands trembling, and touched the stone. A blinding light. A great and terrible force, pouring through her veins, through her soul. And then, shattering. A rupture that tore through the temple, through the air, through the veil itself. A scream, her own, lost to the wind. And darkness. Not the cold, empty kind. But the kind that waited. The kind that whispered. The kind that never truly left. The vision faded. Leora gasped, stumbling backward as the present rushed back in. The glade. The watchers. The woman. The truth. She had done it. She had shattered the stone. And now, the veil had called her back. To finish what she had begun. Her pulse thrummed beneath her skin. Slow. Measured. A quiet drumbeat against the stillness. The woman before her did not move. The figures in the glade did not stir. And yet, something had changed. The weight of truth pressed into the air, thick and unyielding. The glade no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like a threshold. Leora's breath wavered as she turned the shard over in her palm, tracing the edges with trembling fingers. She had broken it. She had shattered the stone. But she had not been alone. The memories pulsed beneath her skin, echoing through her thoughts like the hush of distant waves. The circle. The temple. The moment of sacrifice. The barrier had been failing. And so, she had torn it apart. Her lips parted, the question forming on her tongue before she even realized she was speaking. What happened to them? The woman's gaze did not waver. Leora swallowed. The others. The ones who stood with me. For a long, aching moment, there was only silence. Then. They are here. Leora's breath caught. The figures in the glade. Not echoes. Not specters. They had been waiting. All this time. A shiver rippled through her spine, though it was not fear that settled in her bones. It was something deeper. Something older. Something like understanding. The woman stepped closer, her form flickering like a candle caught between worlds. You were not meant to return. Leora's fingers curled tighter around the shard. But I did. The woman inclined her head. Yes. Leora licked her lips, her throat dry. Then why am I here? The whisper came as soft as breath. To finish what was undone. The air thickened. The ground beneath her feet pulsed, as though the earth itself had been holding its breath. The veil was listening. Leora exhaled, slow and steady. How? The woman lifted a hand. A ripple passed through the glade. The figures stirred, their forms shifting like shadows in the wind. The mist that curled between the trees thickened, rising like a tide, folding into itself, reshaping, reforming. Until, at last, the temple stood before her once more. Not in ruins. Not in memory. Whole. The same silver-lined walls. The same vine-wrapped pillars. The same air, thick with power, humming beneath her skin. And at its center, the stone. Not shattered. Not lost. But waiting. A slow, careful breath passed through Leora's lips. The veil had brought her back. Not to remember. Not to regret. But to begin again. The figures moved at the edges of her vision, silent shadows watching, waiting, as she stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the temple. The stone pulsed, its glow a quiet heartbeat against the hush. Leora lifted the shard in her palm. The light shifted. Not calling. Not demanding. Simply, waiting. Her fingers trembled. She had broken it. But could she restore it? A whisper curled through the air, barely more than a breath. This time, you are not alone. Leora's pulse quickened. The figures stepped closer. The circle was forming once more. And the veil, ever patient, ever watching, wrapped around her like an unseen hand. Waiting. Holding. Guiding. Leora took another breath, steadying herself. And then, she reached for the stone. Her fingertips hovered just above the stone. The air trembled around her. Not wind. Not breath. Something else. A waiting. A watching. The figures in the glade stood at the temple's edge, their forms still blurred at the seams, their presence a quiet pulse in the silence. They did not step forward. They did not retreat. They simply waited. Leora swallowed. She had broken the stone. And yet, as she stood here now, staring down at the pulsing glow, the weight of that truth felt distant. As if it had never truly belonged to her alone. The shard in her palm hummed, the edges still warm from where she had clutched it so tightly. It wanted to return. She could feel it. The way a drop of water seeks the river. The way a flame leans toward air. It was only waiting for her to decide. Her breath was slow. Measured. One moment. Then another. And then. She lowered the shard. The instant it touched the surface of the stone, light surged. Not a blinding flash. Not a violent burst. Something softer. Deeper. Like the slow unfurling of dawn. Leora's breath hitched as the glow spread, gentle as water rippling outward, catching the edges of the temple, spilling into the glade beyond. The figures stirred. Not startled. Not afraid. As if they had been waiting for this, too. The light wound around their forms, threading through the mist, pulling them from shadow into something clearer, something whole. And as Leora stood there, her palm still pressed against the stone, she felt it. The others. Their presence. Not echoes. Not memories. They were here. Not lost. Not waiting. They had always been with her. Her throat tightened, a slow ache blooming in her chest. She had thought she was alone. She had thought she had broken everything. But the veil did not take. It did not abandon. It only waited. Waited for the right moment. Waited for her to see. A breath passed through her lips, slow and steady. The stone pulsed beneath her fingers, warm now. Whole. The circle had been restored. The temple stood unbroken. And Leora. Leora was no longer standing at the edge of a past she could not change. She was here. Now. Alive. And as the veil exhaled around her, the figures watching in quiet reverence, she understood. She was never meant to return as she was. She was meant to come back as something new. And so, she did. She lifted her gaze to the trees, to the sky stretching wide beyond the glade, to the light filtering through the branches, softer now, kinder. The veil no longer whispered. It only listened. Holding her. Waiting. For what came next. And as Leora stepped forward, out of the temple, out of the past, out of the weight she had carried for so long, she whispered back. I'm ready. And the veil, at last, was silent. Leora did not rush. She did not need to. The veil was in no hurry. The trees stood tall and still, their branches curved overhead like the ribs of some great, slumbering beast, their leaves murmuring in slow, drowsy sighs. The light filtering through them was soft, golden, sifting down like dust over ancient ruins, catching in her hair, in the curve of her palm, in the folds of the robe that had never truly belonged to her but felt like it had been waiting for her all along. She stepped forward. The figures did not move, but she felt them. Not just their presence. Their knowing. Their watching. They had always known she would return. She had been the only one who doubted. She let her breath unfurl in slow, steady waves. The air felt warmer now, not with heat, but with something softer, something deeper. The weight of sorrow had not left her. But it was not heavy anymore. She carried it the way the trees carried the whispers of the wind. The way the earth carried the echoes of footsteps long since faded. She carried it because it was hers. And that was enough. The stone at her feet pulsed one final time. A quiet heartbeat. A breath exhaled into the world. Then, at last, it stilled. Whole. Restored. At peace. Leora turned. The figures remained in the clearing, their edges softer now, their forms no longer bound to shadow. They would stay. This place had always been theirs. And she was free to leave. The thought did not frighten her. It did not ache the way it once had. She had come searching for a way to mend what had been broken. And in doing so, she had found herself whole. The path stretched before her, winding through the trees, dappled in golden light. It was not the same path she had walked before. It was new. She was new. The wind stirred through the leaves, brushing against her skin in a soft, parting caress. And as she took her first step beyond the clearing, beyond the past, beyond the hush of the temple's whispers, the veil let her go. Not as a lost soul. Not as a wanderer. But as one who had finally come home. And somewhere, in the hush of the trees, the forest sighed. At peace. At last. The path before Leora was dappled with golden light, winding like a ribbon through the hush of the veil. Each step she took felt lighter now, the weight of the past no longer pressing against her ribs, no longer curling like vines around her breath. She did not rush. She did not need to. Time itself had slowed, drawn out by the hush of the forest, by the weight of something ancient and knowing resting within the trees. She let the silence hold her, let it cradle her like cupped hands catching rain. The figures in the glade remained where she had left them, their forms no longer edged in shadow, no longer bound by the sorrow that had once anchored them here. They did not follow her, but she felt them still, watching, waiting, not with expectation but with quiet certainty. She had been meant to come. She had been meant to leave. And both were true at once. A breath. A slow exhale. The air in the veil had shifted. It was lighter now, softer, the tension that had once curled through the trees now unwinding, like a knot gently loosening, like hands slowly releasing their grip. Leora let herself feel it. The quiet. The stillness. The knowing. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the restored stone in her palm, feeling the way it pulsed with something old and steady, like a heartbeat that had never truly faded. It was not hers to keep. It had never been. But she had been its keeper. For a moment. And that was enough. The trees whispered above her, their leaves shifting like pages turning in a book without end. The light moved with them, golden and soft, casting long, stretching shadows that did not frighten her anymore. She stepped forward. Slow. Deliberate. The hush of the veil wrapped around her like a second skin, like a gentle embrace, like the warmth of hands pressed lightly to her shoulders. And with every step, the forest breathed. The wind stirred through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, of distant rain, of something sweet and lingering that she could not name but had always known. The path beneath her feet stretched on, winding and twisting, never revealing too much at once. She did not mind. She had never been in a hurry. Not anymore. The trees whispered. The light shifted. And somewhere, in the hush of the veil, the echoes of her footsteps faded. Not lost. Not forgotten. But carried forward, gentle and endless, into the waiting quiet. Into peace. At last. Leora's footsteps were barely more than whispers against the earth, fading almost as soon as they touched the ground. The air around her carried a quiet hum, not a sound exactly, but a presence, something felt more than heard. It was not loneliness. It was not emptiness. It was the hush of something vast and patient, something that had been waiting longer than time had words to measure. And she was a part of it now. She let the feeling settle into her bones, slow and deep, like warmth soaking into skin after a long, cold night. It did not rush her. It did not demand anything of her. It simply existed, and she existed within it. The trees above swayed with a rhythm she could not hear, but she could feel it, slow, steady, stretching out into the distance. Leaves turned over in the soft breeze, their edges catching the light, flashing silver and gold, like the surface of a slow-moving river under a waning sun. She exhaled. The weight that had once curled in her chest, coiled tight like a thing with claws, had loosened. Not gone, not entirely, but softer. No longer sharp. No longer digging into her ribs. The forest did not hold her prisoner. The veil had never been a trap. It had only been waiting. Waiting for her to understand. She pressed her palm against the smooth, cool surface of the restored stone, letting it rest there, feeling the faint thrum beneath her fingers. It was neither warm nor cold, only constant. Only steady. A pulse in the quiet, matching the slow, deliberate beat of something larger than her, something she could not name but had always known. A breath. A step forward. The hush of the veil curled around her, wrapping her in a sense of stillness so complete, so absolute, it felt as if she were walking not through a forest, but through the spaces between moments, between heartbeats, between dreams. There was no rush. There never had been. The world outside the veil would still be there, waiting. The rising sun, the distant voices, the weight of life beyond this place. But not yet. Not now. Now, there was only this. The whisper of the wind. The warmth of dappled light against her skin. The steady pulse of the stone in her palm. The hush. The quiet. The endless, stretching peace of knowing she did not have to go just yet. She could stay. She could rest. And the veil would hold her. As long as she needed. As long as it took. Forever, if she wished. And for now, that was enough. The hush of the veil was neither silence nor sound, but something in between, a presence as light as mist, as deep as a dream. Leora stood within it, her breath slow, steady, barely stirring the air. Time had lost its meaning here. She did not know how long she had been standing. Or if she had been standing at all. Perhaps she had always been here, just as the trees had always been here, just as the stone in her palm had always been waiting. Perhaps she was only now remembering. The leaves above stirred with the wind, but the wind itself did not touch her. It was distant, like something happening in another world, another time, beyond the veil of this quiet place. Here, she was untouched. Unrushed. She let her fingers trace the smooth curve of the stone, feeling the pulse beneath her fingertips, slow and steady, like the rhythm of a heart too vast to belong to any one creature alone. It was the heartbeat of the veil itself. Or perhaps it was hers. Perhaps they were the same now. The trees did not move closer, nor did they drift away. They only stood, watching without eyes, waiting without expectation. The figures at the edge of the clearing had not disappeared. They had not approached. They only remained. Present. Quiet. They did not need to speak. They did not need to move. They were here, and she was here, and that was enough. A breath. Soft. Barely there. The hush of the veil curled around her, wrapping her in something more than warmth, something deeper, something softer. A feeling. A knowing. She was not alone. She had never been alone. Not truly. She exhaled. Her body did not feel heavy, nor did it feel light. It simply was. Resting. Floating. Existing in the space between motion and stillness. Somewhere in the distance, though there was no distance here, not really, a faint glow flickered. Not fire, not moonlight, but something else. Something softer, something less defined. It did not call to her, did not beckon, but she knew it would be there when she was ready. She did not have to move toward it yet. She could stay here. Just a little longer. Just long enough to let the hush settle deeper. Long enough for her breath to slow even more. Long enough for wakefulness to loosen its grip entirely. She could rest. She could drift. And the veil would hold her. Hold her. Hold her. Until all that remained was quiet. And then, even the quiet would fade. Into sleep. Into peace. Into nothing at all. The veil did not ask anything of her. It did not press. It did not demand. It only held. Held her in its quiet embrace, in its breathless, endless hush. Time had unraveled. There was no before. No after. Only now. Only this moment. Only this breath. The faint glow in the distance had not disappeared, but it no longer seemed separate from the dark, no longer seemed separate from her. It was part of the hush now, part of the stillness, part of the way the air curled around her, weightless and soft. She had no need to reach for it. It would be there. When she was ready. If she was ever ready. Or perhaps, she already had been. Perhaps she had always been moving toward it, even in the stillness. Perhaps everything had already unfolded. Perhaps it was simply waiting for her to remember. Her fingers relaxed. The stone in her palm did not fall. It simply became part of the hush. Her breath was slower now. Soft. Shallow. Barely there. The veil had no edges anymore. No borders. It stretched forever, but it also did not stretch at all. It was simply everything. Everywhere. And she was part of it. No longer separate. No longer a visitor. She had become the hush. She had become the quiet. She had become the stillness. She could rest. She could float. She could let go. And as she did, the hush deepened. The darkness softened. The world faded. And then, there was only sleep. Only peace. Only quiet. Only nothing. Nothing at all. Leora did not wake all at once. At first, it was only a feeling. A presence. A touch, featherlight, brushing against the edges of her mind. Not a voice. Not a sound. Just a thought. One that did not belong to her. Yet it curled through her thoughts like a strand of wind, barely there, barely real. A whisper of something ancient. Something patient. Something that had never left. She should not have heard it. She should not have felt it. Not here. Not in the hush. But it was there. Waiting. Watching. Calling. And when she breathed again, when she opened her eyes, the veil was not as it had been. The hush was still there, yes. But it had changed. It had deepened. Darkened. It was no longer only silence. It was something more. Something vast. Something endless. And it was listening. She did not move. She did not speak. But the presence knew. It had always known. And slowly, with infinite patience, it whispered again. Not a word. Not a name. Just a single feeling. A feeling that curled through her breath, through her bones, through the hush itself. A feeling she could not ignore. A feeling she had never been able to ignore. A feeling she had known long before she ever stepped into the veil. A single truth. One that had always been waiting for her. Come deeper. Leora. A name whispered through the hush, not spoken aloud, but felt. A name that does not belong only to her. A name that belongs to the past. To the roots beneath the earth. To the wind that stirs the branches. To the hush itself. Leora. She feels it now. Not just as a name, but as a thread in something far greater. A thread woven through the hush, through the veil, through the endless hush of time. And as she stands there, breathing in the hush, breathing in the knowing, she feels it begin to shift. To stir. To wake. Not all at once. Not in a rush. But slowly. Like a whisper stretching through the dark. Like a tide pulling back before the wave. Like something patient, waiting for her to listen. And so she does. She listens. To the hush. To the knowing. To the veil itself. And the veil. The veil listens back. Slowly. Gently. Like mist unfurling over the earth in the quiet hours before dawn. Like a memory surfacing after lifetimes of silence. Like the hush breaking, not with sound, but with understanding. Leora does not move, not yet. She only breathes. And the veil breathes with her. The air is thick with something unseen, something vast and patient. A presence woven into the very fabric of this place. It does not rush her. It does not demand. It only waits. And so she listens. The figures in the clearing remain still, their edges blurred by the whispering light. The woman before her. The one whose presence feels like something she should know. Still does not touch her. But her eyes. Her eyes are endless. Deep pools of shadowed silver, reflecting things Leora cannot yet name. You were always meant to return, the woman says again, her voice barely a sound, more a feeling. Leora swallows, her pulse slow and steady. But why? The hush stirs. The figures shift, their outlines flickering like candlelight. The woman tilts her head, and for the first time, there is something like sorrow in her expression. Because you were the one who broke it. Leora's breath catches. The shard in her hand grows heavier. The veil does not rush her understanding. It allows the weight of those words to settle, to sink in. You were the one who shattered the stone, the woman murmurs. You were the one who fractured the hush. A memory stirs. Faint. Distant. But real. A silver blade, reflecting the glow of an unseen light. A trembling hand. Her hand. The sound of something breaking. Not loud, not sharp, but deep. Like a thread being severed. Like the hush itself being wounded. Leora's heart beats slow and heavy. The veil has always known. The hush has always remembered. She was not only meant to return. She was meant to mend. To undo what had been done. To weave herself back into the hush. The woman watches, waiting. The figures in the clearing do not move. The air thickens, charged with something vast and quiet. And Leora. Leora finally understands. She was not just a visitor here. She was the wound. And she was the key. The hush shifts. Not breaking. Not ending. But changing. And Leora, standing at the edge of something deeper than time, takes her first step forward. Leora takes another step. The ground beneath her feet is no longer earth. Not entirely. It feels softer, yet solid. Like something woven from memory itself, shifting beneath her touch but never yielding completely. She feels it, not just underfoot, but in her bones. The hush is not merely silence. It is a presence. It is listening. Waiting. The figures in the glade remain still, their outlines flickering as if caught between light and shadow. They are not just watchers. They are part of the hush. Part of her. And the woman standing before her. The one with silver-shadowed eyes, with sorrow pressed into the quiet curve of her mouth. She is more than a stranger. Leora knows this now. Even if she does not yet remember why. The air thickens. Not with fear, not with malice, but with expectation. A pause, deep and endless. The hush, holding its breath. And then. The woman lifts a hand. Slow. Measured. A single motion that pulls at something beneath Leora's skin, something that hums and stirs like an echo trying to return to itself. Her fingers hover just above Leora's own. Not touching. Not yet. But close enough that the space between them hums with something unseen. And Leora. She knows, without needing to be told, that this is a choice. She can turn away. Step back. Refuse to remember. Or she can let it come. Let it unfold. Let the hush tell its story. Her story. She exhales. Lets her fingers loosen. And she lets the shard slip from her grasp. It does not fall. It does not shatter. It floats. Suspended between them, held by something unseen. The air shivers. The figures stir. The hush bends. Not breaking, not rupturing, but changing. Becoming something deeper. Something closer. And Leora. She watches as the shard begins to glow. A soft, pulsing light, like the flicker of a candle just before dawn. It reflects in the woman's endless eyes. And for the first time. A smile. Not one of joy. Not yet. But of recognition. You remember. Not a question. A knowing. And Leora. She breathes. She lets the hush wrap around her. And she steps fully into its waiting arms. The light from the shard pulses, gentle and rhythmic, neither urgent nor hurried. It flickers in the space between them, a heartbeat in the hush, a quiet beckoning. Leora does not rush to meet it. She only watches. Feels. The warmth of the glow presses against her skin, brushing her fingertips, threading into the spaces between her thoughts. It is not a demand. It is an invitation. And the hush. It listens. It cradles the moment, stretching the silence into something tangible, something soft and waiting. The woman before her does not speak again. She only waits. And so does Leora. For a time, there is only the quiet. Only the gentle shimmer of the shard, the way the figures in the glade remain just at the edges of sight, blurred and motionless, their presence felt more than seen. Then. A shift. Not in sound. Not in movement. But in knowing. The hush changes, deepens, as if it has found its shape, as if it has settled into something inevitable. And within it, Leora remembers. Not in sudden flashes. Not in violent waves. But in slow, steady unfurling, like petals reaching toward the light. She remembers hands, warm and strong, guiding hers over an ancient sigil carved into stone. She remembers whispers, layered over time, each voice a thread in a tapestry too vast to see all at once. She remembers the weight of the shard before it was broken. Whole and humming with quiet power, thrumming against her palm like a second pulse. She remembers. This place. This moment. This hush. She has stood here before. Lived this before. Not once. Not twice. But many, many times. And she knows. Now, as she has always known. That she has always chosen to return. The woman watches her, silent, waiting. But Leora does not need to ask why. She already knows the answer. Because the hush. The glade. The shard. They are all the same. They are all her. A breath. A pause. A knowing. Leora lifts her hand. Not hesitant. Not uncertain. She reaches for the shard, her fingers passing through the glow, letting the warmth sink into her skin. The hush tightens, folding in around them, as if the veil itself is holding its breath. And as she closes her hand around the shard, the silence speaks. And everything begins again. The glow of the shard is no longer contained to her palm. It expands, unfurling in slow, weightless ripples, casting soft illumination through the hush. It does not banish the shadows. It does not demand dominion over the quiet. It simply exists. And the veil. It listens. The woman before her does not flinch at the light. She does not recoil or shift or shrink. She only watches, her gaze endless, unreadable, ancient beyond comprehension. A presence, not just a person. A force, not just a figure. The hush gathers itself, curling inward, pressing close against Leora's ribs, against the fragile spaces between each heartbeat. It is no longer empty. It never was. It was always waiting. For her. For this. Leora takes a breath, slow, deep, anchoring herself in the moment, in the weight of knowing that presses gently against her skin. The figures at the edges of the glade do not move. They are not restless. They do not shift or waver. Because they, too, have always been waiting. And now, at last, the moment has arrived. The shard pulses once, twice, thrumming in time with the hush. And the moment. It bends. Not forward. Not backward. But outward. Stretching wide, curling around them like the hush itself, circling, spiraling, expanding in slow, unbroken loops. Leora does not move. She does not need to. She only feels the weight of memory, the press of time, The way the hush carries everything, past, present, future, woven seamlessly into its endless embrace. She is not afraid. She should be. But she is not. Because the hush does not threaten. The hush does not take. The hush only holds. And so she lets it. She lets the quiet wrap around her, lets it settle into the hollow spaces inside her ribs, lets it whisper in the language of things long forgotten. She closes her eyes, and the hush deepens. It does not end. It never will. It only stretches. On and on and on. Forever. Leora stands at the heart of it now, not just the hush, not just the veil, but something older. Something vaster. Something that was here long before her first breath and will remain long after her last. She does not fight it. She does not resist the slow, endless pull of the quiet. Because she is part of it. She always was. The figures around her do not move. They do not stir or blink or shift. They only exist, held in the stillness, in the hush, in the space between now and then, between was and will be. The woman before her. No. Not just a woman. Not anymore. Not for a long, long time. She is a whisper given form. A memory woven from mist and starlight. A fragment of something whole, something vast, something eternal. And her voice. It does not break the hush. It is part of it. You are ready. The words do not startle. They do not jar or crack or disrupt the quiet. They settle. Soft. Weightless. Leora exhales. The hush moves with her, bending like breath, like wind, like the slow shifting of light through the trees. She does not ask what she is ready for. She does not need to. The knowing is already inside her. It always was. It thrums beneath her skin, in her bones, in the spaces between her thoughts. A thread of recognition. A call answered. A door opened. The shard in her palm is no longer small. No longer fragile. No longer just a piece of something broken. It glows, warm and steady, pulsing in time with the hush, with the veil, with something vast and unseen. The moment bends again. The hush deepens. And the figures. They move. Slow. Silent. Like drifting shadows, like shifting mist, like the hush itself pulling apart, unspooling, reforming into something new. The woman lifts her hand, palm up, fingers curled slightly. Leora's breath catches. Not in fear. Not in hesitation. But in understanding. This is it. The turning. The moment where before becomes after. Where silence becomes knowing. Where the hush becomes something else. Leora steps forward. The light follows. The veil watches. And time. It stretches. On and on and on. Without end. Without beginning. Only the hush. Only the quiet. Only the waiting. Until Leora reaches out. Fingertips brushing against the woman's palm, against the hush itself, against the edge of everything that ever was or ever will be. The moment stills. The hush holds its breath. And the world changes. Forever.